This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
A lot of good teams struggled across week one in the NFL, and unfortunately for them, they've got some tough matchups once again on tap for week number 2. We're going to preview those big matchups for week 2 and talk to Dr. Ed Feng about trying to predict bounce backs, when to worry, when not to, and get you ready for week 2 across the NFL. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work at thepowerrank.com and check him out on Twitter at thepowerrank. Ed, we are on to week number 2 in the NFL. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. It's really good to have both college football and NFL in full swing, and everything feels right with the world.
It really does. And I think the good thing with the NFL is we've got data to look at now, which I like because I love data. I love having back in my spreadsheets, which is enjoyable, but also there's still a lot of room for overreactions. The sample is small enough where we can find some over or underreactions as well across the NFL. And I think that's always a good chance for us as bettors, as people who are tuned in and try to pay attention to hopefully take advantage of that. We'll talk about some spots where maybe there are over or under reactions heading into week 2, how to judge that stuff, and much more throughout the show for today. But first, a quick reminder, 2 shows already up here for this weekend coming up across college football and the NFL. Talked to Ed yesterday about college football week number 3, broke down Colorado versus Colorado State, other key games in week 3, and Ed's favorite bets at FanDuel Sportsbook. Also, for Thursday night, Tom Vecchio broke down Eagles versus Vikings on Primetime Tom. That is right here in the Covering the Spread podcast feed, talking about the player props in that game and much more. You can also find Primetime Tom up on FanDuel TV Plus. You can find this show on the FanDuel YouTube page as well. So if you want to watch FanDuel TV Plus to get Up and Adams watching that live, just log into your FanDuel Sportsbook or FanDuel Fantasy account by going to FanDuel.com/watch or checking it out on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, so you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, and Virginia. Twice. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, or visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, or call 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. NFL Sunday Ticket offer ends on Monday, 9/18/23. No refunds. Terms and embargoes apply. $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket, not YouTube TV. YouTube TV base plan required to watch YouTube TV. Redemption requires a Google account and current form of payment. Commercial use is excluded. Let's dig in now to week number 2 in the NFL, Ed, and start things off by talking about those high-powered teams that struggled in week number 1. Talking the Chiefs, the Bills, Bengals, to a certain extent, the Ravens. I know they won that game pretty handily, but the offense not clicking on all cylinders. And I want to ask you, Ed, what process do you go through when trying to determine whether there is a legitimate cause for concern when teams like that struggle out the gate?
I think every team's probably a little bit different. Look, everyone really did struggle last year. The passing success rate in the NFL was 42.8%. It was 39.5 in week 1. Ouch. Thank you, Joe Burrow. So yeah, it was not good. You mentioned Kansas City. I don't really have any issues with Kansas City. The receivers had the dropsies. I thought Mahomes was pretty good, and Kansas City could potentially cover if Kadarius Toney doesn't let a pick six go right through his hands, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's anything to worry about there. Let's see who else. Joe Burrow was terrible. Yeah, he'll probably be fine. Daniel Jones was terrible. Might not be that fine. We'll see how that goes. I don't particularly trust Daniel Jones, and the Giants probably were on the good side of fortune last year, and the market suggests they're not going to be particularly great, and they weren't. They were actually pretty terrible. The Baltimore game was pretty interesting too, because I think Houston had about the same, or if not more, total yards, but they ended up going 1 for 4 on fourth down, which will certainly help swing the outcome of a game, particularly when you have a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud, which we'll get back to in a little bit later in a weird part of the show. But and then who else? Oh, Josh Allen.
Yeah.
Man, like, did he kind of have that gunslinger mentality last year? Like, was there like a shift from 2021 with Daboll to like 2022 with Dorsey last year?
So they were like very efficient last year, but he had like short circuit moments, I guess is what I would say. And I chalked it up to like, Gabe Davis was kind of banged up and they didn't have a lot of playmakers. So he kind of went into like hero ball mode. And like for him, that can be okay at times, but there are moments where it doesn't go well. And like,
yeah,
I feel like he's so like my dog, she's a psycho. She's 3 years old, and like she's a great dog, but when she sees another dog she likes, she blacks out. And like she like doesn't listen, she's like trying to like jump on the dog, jump on the person. And I think that Josh Allen has those blackout moments, like where he just kind of like his brain goes off. And the general baseline is high, and that's great. But like the floor is scary when he has those blackout moments. And I think that that's kind of what we saw more last week than we saw anytime in any game last year. It happened what's the playoff game against Kansas? There was some playoff game where he like had a bunch of weird mistakes. It's like, it just occasionally creeps back in. Maybe so like, I guess for me, when I see that from Josh Allen, I can kind of write it off because I know he like does that, but like, it also means that it could come back at any moment too.
Yeah, for sure. That's pretty interesting. I think that, I don't know. It was a little bit disheartening to see him like go for home runs instead of like just settle for the doubles that that they can certainly get with that offense. And so I've talked before on the show about bad ball rate and how I look at the sum of interceptions plus passes defended to gauge how likely interceptions are to happen in the future. And usually a 3-year sample is pretty good because we can get that with NFL quarterbacks. Josh Allen was worse last year. So I'm trying to figure out whether that's a trend that's going to continue, whether a young coordinator like Ken Dorsey has the command to be like, hey, can you hit some doubles instead of like chucking home runs like you were trying to do against the Jets and essentially gifting them that game. Anyways, lots to figure out there. I think that's probably the most interesting one. I mean, I do think they will be fine in general. I'm not, I still think the Bills are a Super Bowl contender, and we'll get back to that in a little bit.
Yeah, I agree that they'll be fine because Josh Allen has shown enough times, to me at least, that he can snap out of those weird spurts where he just becomes a turnover machine to like get back to being psycho mode in a good way, Josh Allen. So I have faith he can turn it around because I've seen this happen before. So maybe this is the time where he doesn't, but I doubt that. I think that they will be fine broadly. Let's take a look at a couple of offenses that we discussed there with the Ravens and the Bengals going head to head here in week number 2. Right now, this is actually a 3-point game. It was 3.5 earlier on, back down to 3 with the Bengals as 3-point favorites at home. Total is 46.5. And I had a hard time this entire offseason trying to pin down the Ravens because it's Lamar Jackson. We know how good he can be, but also we haven't seen that version of Lamar in a while. Todd Monken is now in town, which is a change there at OC. And they brought in these pass catchers, but Mark Andrews is banged up. They've already lost their left tackle and center, potentially for week number 2 as well. So what do your numbers say about the Ravens entering week 2?
Yeah, I mean, this game is really hard to handicap. I mean, you look at the numbers. I have this at Cincinnati minus, but I have Cincinnati winning by about 2.7 points, so pretty close to the markets. Before last week, I would have made Cincinnati more than a 4-point favorite in this game, so clearly, adjustment on Cincinnati based on how awful they were last week. Don't necessarily put that too much stock into that as we have already discussed. With Baltimore, I mean, you mentioned the injuries. Like it's kind of hard to figure out if the market is reacting to Cincinnati and saying they're not as good, or just, with all the injuries that Baltimore has. Marlon Humphrey didn't play, the cornerback for Baltimore, so he was also out as well. I really don't know. I have no interest in betting the spread in this game. I thought it was interesting that Zay Flowers was their leading receiver at 78 yards, which is, not probably a good thing for Baltimore's offense. I think we expect a little bit more for them against a team like Houston. So, I mean, it's a game that I'm not interested in betting. I mean, not only because my numbers don't have anything here, but I think there is more to figure out about Baltimore. There is, since he started the season pretty slowly last year too, they weren't particularly good in the first couple of weeks. They figured it out. They were pretty good after that. So, probably not a lot of value here. The market's definitely moving towards my number, which I like.
Right.
And I'll stay away from it.
I think this is one of the games where I sighed with relief when I saw there was no value in my numbers. I've got a 2.55, the Bengals by 2.55. And it's okay, cool. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to try to diagnose am I too worried about the Ravens offensive line injuries to bet them? Or, am I too worried about Joe Burrow's lingering calf thing to bet them? I can just ignore it and watch this game. And hopefully it'll be a fun one and just kind of sit back and enjoy, because we're both in line with market here. I've got Bengals by 2.55. You had 2.7. So we can happily disregard that one. Let's move now to talk about the Chiefs and the Jaguars. Pretty excited for this game. Where right now the Chiefs are 3.5-point favorites. That was 3, I believe, yesterday. Total is 51.5. And obviously the Chiefs pass catchers had a nightmare showing in week number 1. Now, that could go two ways. You could say, okay, the pass catchers beyond Travis Kelce are bad, but you could also say they didn't have Travis Kelce and the ball hit them in the hands. And from a regression perspective, you don't expect 8 drops from NFL professional wide receivers. So does it set off any alarm bells for you, or can we just kind of diagnose this game pretty straight up?
No, I mean, it doesn't set off any alarm bells for me. What I thought was interesting about this game, I mean, I have it by Kansas City by 2, but I actually only have it Kansas City by about 3 in the preseason. I would kind of thought it would be more. That's a lot of respect for Jacksonville, what they're doing. Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence. And they got things done week 1 against Indiana. Probably a bad Indianapolis team, but they were able to pull away towards the end there. I haven't bet it yet. I don't like betting against the Chiefs, but it does seem like maybe there's some value at plus 3.5 for this team that's at home. Kelsey's questionable. Looks like, I think the Chiefs have zero incentive to rush him back if there's any question at all. L'Jarius Sneed, the cornerback, probably their best cover corner, played last week, but was questionable, is questionable again. I'm keeping an eye on things here. I probably will decide to stay away from this game, but there is a little bit of interest in Jacksonville plus 3.5.
I took the 3.5 once it got there because when it was at 3, it was close enough where I wasn't super enticed, but Once it got to 3.5, I decided to actually bite on the Jags. And I bet the Jags a lot last year, which worked out well. It was not always great for like my heart health, but like it worked out well. And then in week 1, you mentioned the matchup with Indianapolis, but like I think it was encouraging to see Calvin Ridley actually make a difference on this team right away. Because if you put a difference making wide receiver who has proven, I think once again, he actually is a difference maker, and pair him with an ascending quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, even if we assume Lawrence himself from a skill level is the exact same as last year, giving him better pass catchers should elevate his efficiency numbers, even if he himself is the exact same. So not even like baking an upward movement for Lawrence. I am assuming Kelsey plays in my numbers right now. Chris Jones, I think, will be good to go now that he has his redone 1-year deal in there too. Even with that, though, I think the Jags are valued 3.5, and it's not enjoyable to bet against Patrick Mahomes. I used to have a rule where I didn't want to ever root against him, but I think 3.5 with this game being in Jacksonville is enough where we should be willing to pull the trigger due to all the factors involved. So it's uncomfortable, but I think that the 3.5, I agree with what your numbers say, where 3.5 is likely a good enough value to buy into.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to our third featured game here. For Sunday, we got the 49ers taking on the Rams. A lot of movement in this game, too. Total stayed pretty steady at 45, but it was 49ers -8. It is now 49ers -7. And I think the big reason for that is because Matthew Stafford looked healthy in week 1. The Rams played very well there. And Ed, I think we've talked a lot about the Rams ever since Stafford got there as being like this kind of fragile team because they have very few difference makers, but those difference makers are healthy right now. So how much do your expectations for them shift, having seen Stafford look pretty good in week 1?
Yeah, I really didn't expect that mid-September I'd be talking about Tutu Atwell and Puka Nacua. These guys both had 119 receiving yards week 1 for Matthew Stafford for this Los Angeles Rams offense. And I think a lot of people kind of like Seattle coming into the season and then kind of got slapped in the face week 1 for Rams teams that didn't have superstar Cooper Kupp out there at the wide receiver position. I started looking into these wide receivers. I'm definitely, looking more into props this year. And, this Nacua guy, it seems like a pretty big time fade candidate. And I'm not saying that he's not, but this was a kid that was at BYU last year. And I looked up his numbers. He had 3.53 yards per route run last year at BYU. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 3.18. And last year, and he had CJ Stroud throwing to him.
Right.
So, this guy produced, he was in excess of 3 yards per route run. Anything in excess of 3 yards in college is a pretty phenomenal number. And so this guy produced big time at the college level. That doesn't mean you're going to produce at the NFL level, but 14 targets, 119 yards. Holy cow. Doesn't mean you're not necessarily going to fade them in the future, but yeah, just like an insane surprise to kind of look at this box score, to look at what happened there. Obviously, on the other hand, San Francisco looked pretty good, really took care of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Brock Purdy looked good. And so I have this at San Francisco -7.5. That's my prediction for the game, pretty close to the market. What I find interesting is my preseason wisdom of crowds model, which I found to be pretty good against the spread the first 6 weeks of the season. Not surprisingly, they have San Francisco by 10 in this game. So again, I think this is a perfect example of where that model is potentially pretty good. If I'm going to lean anyway, I'm going to lean towards the Niners. We all thought the Rams were going to be terrible. We thought the Rams would be even worse without Cooper Kupp. Are we really ready to go against that after one game? Probably not.
Yeah, I did take the Rams +8 here when it was at +8, and that was largely because the offense looked healthy, and I think that's a big thing for them beyond Cooper Kupp. The downside of that is that they played well defensively in that game, and there's not a lot of talent on the defensive side for the Rams. Like, it's a lot of young guys you're hoping make a leap, and I think that if I'm going to lose that +8 bet, it's going to be because of the youth on defense. You're putting that up against Kyle Shanahan, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. Positionless football against guys who may not have a lot of experience is a little scary. So I do have the Rams +8 from earlier this week. I am glad I've gotten movement, but it's a lot of times when you get movement, Ed, I don't know if you feel the same way, but like you kind of like feel this like sense of relief. Like you can feel like you can exhale a bit, like, okay,
Right.
at least I was on the right side from a movement perspective if the bet doesn't pay off. I've gotten movement here, but I have not had that sigh of relief yet because I'm still worried about that defense specifically.
For sure. And I wouldn't be surprised if this gets back to 8.
Yeah, I think we could see that too. Okay, Ed, let's open up the board for you for this week in week number 2. Where else are you seeing value at FanDuel Sportsbook this week?
Yeah, we talked about the Buffalo Bills, and I talked about my concerns about Josh Allen, and I'm certainly not backing down on that. But look, Buffalo is still a Super Bowl contender. They're still a really good team. Oh, is that back down to 8.5?
Yeah,
awesome. That was at 9.5 this morning. Awesome. Anyways, I like Buffalo this week. I feel like we're getting a discount on Buffalo after a performance against the New York Jets. Obviously, it wasn't good for them to lose to the Jets. They were terrible. They weren't good. I think it's important to note in that game that also Zach Wilson wasn't good either, right? They won that game because of a kick return in overtime. So let's not like pat Zach Wilson on the back and think the Jets are doing anything too much this season. But and Las Vegas, they won last week, but like there's still a little bit of mess. Not a ton of talent there, and both Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Myers are listed as questionable. It seems like they play, but I just feel like we're getting a discount because of what happened on Monday night. I have this number more closer to 11.5. I think there's a lot of value. This morning, DraftKings was the only book that was 8.5. Everyone else was at 9.5. Looks like it's come back a little bit towards Buffalo. Not really sure why, but I think there's a lot of value here in the Super Bowl contender Bills to cover here.
Yeah, it was 9.5, or I think it was 9.5 before Monday night. It went down to 8.5 after Monday night. And it kind of stayed there for a while, went back to 9.5, and then overnight went back to 8.5 again. So it's been hovering back and forth between those two. I don't think Myers will play. He got a really rough looking concussion this past week. So I think he's actually going to sit, which means it'll be it'll basically be the pass catchers they had last year minus Darren Waller, although he wasn't really there anyway a whole lot last year. But it's like Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, guys like that. So they're going to be down some key bodies there. Also, Chandler Jones seems like he's protesting the entire front office. So don't think he'll play either on the defensive side. So they're definitely down some bodies. And it's concerning for their side for sure. So Ed likes the Bills minus 8.5. You mentioned Stroud earlier on. Any interest for you in that Colts Texans game? Because I think this game is actually like sneakily kind of fun because it's Richardson versus Stroud. I think it's at least going to be entertaining, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, we think Richardson's playing, even though he got that knock towards the end of the game.
I think it's a bruise on his knee, so he should be okay to play.
I mean, I think that game is really interesting. Dr. Eric Eager came on my podcast and talked about how he thinks there's a lot more talent on that Houston team than people are giving him credit for. That secondary might be pretty good. Obviously, there's a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball. I think Stroud threw it 45 times or something last week. But yeah, that could be that could be interesting as well. I don't really have an opinion on the side or anything, but I will be with you in being interested in watching that game.
That one is also moved. I got it at 106 in the money line for Houston plus 106 is now minus 116. So feeling better about the movement there as they have shifted to now be favored against Indianapolis at home. That is all that we have here for today and this week on covering the spread as far as NFL stuff goes. With Ed, we're going to be back in tomorrow talking player props with JJ Zachariason. Also have Rob Freeman on, talk some strikeout props. I will talk NASCAR in Bristol as well. So a lot of good stuff here still coming up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, FanDuel YouTube, and FanDuel TV Plus. Ed, you mentioned the discussion with Dr. Eric Eager. Where people find that and the rest of your work?
You can find my podcast at the Football Analytics Show. I try to talk to smart analytics and betting people. Mike Craig of Right Angle Sports joined me this week. There's a recent conversation with Dr. Eric Eager as well, where you can get a lot of his thoughts on the NFL, and I will try to continue doing that. And then I'm also writing my newsletter over at thepowerrank.com. Definitely check out 5 Nuggets Saturday every 10 a.m. Eastern on Saturday. Try to put some analytics and some bets in there in case you're looking for some action any given weekend. Check that out at thepowerrank.com.
I was heaping praise on Mike Craig yesterday, talking about how sharp he is, and then you brought on Dr. Eric Eager as a follow-up. Like that's a banger couple episodes there for the Football Analytics Show. So I'll have to go check those out later on today. You can find Ed on Twitter at the Power Rank. I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow FanDuel Research at FanDuel Research. Good luck to you if you're betting Thursday Night Football for the Eagles and the Vikings. Back again tomorrow to talk some props here on the show. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.